I must speak with Morgana to go where she wishes. The living flesh poses a hindrance, but I must go for our aura. Emma, please give me a little more courage.
Well, that intro was a lot more quiet than the last game, wasn't it? Welcome back to my retrospective of .hack. Last time we covered Sign and Infection, and now we're moving on to part 2, Mutation. Mutation was released around 3 months after Infection, same as every other game's release. This gap was there so that the devs could actually look at the criticisms and make minor tweaks and changes based on the feedback that they got. So, did they actually improve upon Infection and fix those issues that I had? Well, just sit down and listen for a second, I'll tell you, God. So the game starts off with a recap of what happened last game. I'm just going to assume that you just came from watching my video of Infection, so we don't need to go over what just happened. I mean, this is called part 2 for a reason, come on. When we get back into the desktop screen, the game picks up right where the story left off last time, and we see Black Rose and the third party member trying to make heads or tails of what happened. Cubia's appearance wasn't just a shock to us either. Around the time of the attack, everyone in the game had their screen freeze and heard a loud, sharp screaming sound before getting kicked out of the world. On the brighter side of things, when the world came back there was an update. Now we have... Oh. Kite and Black Rose decide to go back to where they fought Skaith to find any differences, and strange enough, there's nothing there. Like nothing at all, not even enemies to fight. We do get some fun scenes between Kite and Black Rose though.
But if it was here, could we win? That's... impossible.
You know, fun and tons of cheer. Jokes aside, we finally see Black Rose open up to Kite a little bit. At least enough to admit that she's terrified.
Yeah. Oh, okay, I confess. I'm just a newbie that's trying to act big and tough, that's all.
I mean, yeah, was that supposed to be a secret? We found you at level 1, and when you first saw an enemy, you did this. Before we get any real details on Black Rose, Balmung comes in to show us that he's still a giant prick and doesn't trust us. Even Kite's getting fed up with Balmung. This is the most unamused face I've ever seen on him. He says we bring nothing but trouble and then buggers off. When we get into the room that we fought Skaith in, it looks like a normal room save for the texture screw-ups, and nothing appears out of ordinary. When we get back to the desktop screen, Kite gets a totally safe and not suspicious at all email from an anonymous user, telling him they'll be waiting in a certain area. Kite of course doesn't suspect anything, and hey look, it's a trap. Here we get introduced to Leos, a system administrator of CC Corp. Yeah, that's right, I forgot to mention, CyberConnect is actually both a real game company and a company in-game. You would think this is a big ego boost, but considering how consistently CC Corp screws up in the .hack franchise, I feel like it's a pretty humble inclusion. We learn here that CC Corp has been keeping an eye on us since pretty much the very start. They don't like what we're doing though, claiming that the situation only got worse with our prying. This is where we also get a hint of why Black Rose is in the whole situation in the first place. Her brother was playing the game and went into a coma, just like Orca. She just wants him back and doesn't really care whose fault it is that the situation got this far. Leos, being a giant prick, just says we're working on it and tries to delete Kite's rogue data. Helba steps in the mix though, revealing that CC Corp has tried multiple times to delete Kite already using rare items, but his code is too secure. She mentions that Leos was also the name of the King of Light from the Epitaph of Twilight, which is a long story that we'll get more into as the game progresses. Strap your boots in for that one, kids. Leos buggers off after Helba suggests actually working with the duo instead of going against them, only to email us later basically saying, fine, I guess we'll work with you, but only because I said so. He tells us to meet him in town and we find him disguised as a generic NPC. After giving Kite a heart attack, he gives us a virus core and tells us to check out the board for more leads and investigate them. I'm not really sure why he didn't just tell us all this through email. I mean, that would risk less people hearing in on us, right? We're sort of in plain daylight here. Leos, you really love just making things difficult for your own sake, huh? Anyway, Mia and Elle kind of force their way into exploring an area with us, but before we get to them, we got a lot of optional stuff to do. Like, there's a pretty huge amount of side stuff, and I would even say it takes up more than the actual plot of Mutation. Not only do we have another set of Goblin Tag, but we got dungeons to learn about previous party members and 5 whole new party members in Mutation. And yes, all of them have email chains with old ones getting continuations. While we're on the topic of optional stuff, let me take this chance to forcefully push in information about Liminality. Now I could hear what you're saying right now. Modal, why are you talking about Liminality now of all times? This is all terribly unorganized. Well, first off, Liminality holds a bit of background information about Project.hack, and second, I do what I want, thank you very much. So one additional thing each iMac game came with, which they pretty proudly posted on the box, was a 45-minute anime DVD! These were a bunch of OVAs that describe what was going on in the real world while Kite handled things in the digital world, revealing additional information that we might not get from the games as well. Let's start off with the first OVA that I missed, in the case of My Minase. The episode, along with Liminality as a whole, follows an ex-CC Corp worker named Junichiro Takuoka, as he looks into a series of cases where people have fallen into comas. He suspects CC Corp to be behind this, and the company only gets more suspicious when they hire goons to beat him and warn him to stop snooping around. Obviously, this doesn't even get close to dissuading him, and he moves on to find a girl named Mai Minase. She was found in a shocked state with her boyfriend, Tomonari Kasumi, after playing the world for the first time. It's totally not what they're going for, but the world seems like a sort of drug with these scenes of Tomonari convincing Mai to play. Anyway, Tomonari is actually seen in the game before being placed into a coma. His endgame name is Seek, a player dedicated to becoming one of the descendants of Fianna like Balmung and Orca, basically a top player of the game. And that's all we really need to know about him. After a bit of convincing, Mai agrees to log back into the world with Takaoka, returning to the area she went to when she got knocked out. That area? Chosen Hopeless Nothingness, the same area Kite would later find and battle Scathe. The two get attacked by what is heavily implied to be the cross-wielding bastard, but manage to escape and proceeded to form a partnership in order to figure out the connection between the world and the coma victims. Another important thing to note is at the very start of Liminality, we're shown a man kneeling at the grave of someone named Emma Wieland. He mutters to himself that he won't let things end just like that. And that's all we're gonna say about him until I don't know, give it like 20 minutes, I still need to edit the video. So that was the first OVA that came with Infection. I didn't cover it in the last video when I was talking about Infection because, well, have you seen how long the last video was? I already talked about one anime, I wasn't about to bombard you with another. I'll be mentioning events and moments from Liminality as I explain the story of iMac from now on, since things actually start getting serious in the second disc and onwards. Something to note is that it's sort of hard to tell when exactly these events take place. The first disc obviously takes place sometime before Kite fights Scathe, but still late into the game. While I've seen multiple different possibilities of when the second disc takes place. Regardless of where it might actually be happening, the happenings still hold the same weight and give off the same meaning. I'm only saying that now so if I'm wrong, people won't say mean things to me. So we got a long list of side events to go through, all of which give some good background and development on characters, so let's get this started. First we have Rachel, a blade master that starts a special trading convention in a dungeon. I'm not really sure why she chose to do this all in a dungeon. I mean, you could trade in town and you didn't really go that deep into the dungeon. In fact, you're in the first room of the dungeon. But alright, make this harder on yourself, you damn Boston accented Japanese weirdo.
Oh, that's it, the love archery.
This trading convention is pretty much just one big delivery line where one person wants something the other person has, but the last person has something that no one has, so we need to go find it. Conveniently, that item is in the dungeon we're in. Rachel says thanks when everyone goes home and offers her member address. This is a good time to mention that, oh my god, the start of the game hurts like hell. I found myself getting one hit killed over and over again and doing barely any damage to the enemy, who by the way, often had tolerances making certain attacks useless, which is pretty bad when you have a wave master in your party that could only do magic. Mistral, I'm so sorry, you didn't deserve this. I thought that I was sitting pretty well with the stuff I had when I finished Infection. In fact, I was kinda worried that I would breeze through Mutation because I had all this awesome and powerful stuff after finishing the post-game. But no. The post and late game stuff from Infection just made the start of Mutation a little bit more survivable. I know there wasn't that much stuff to do after the story of Infection, so the odds of someone not doing them are pretty low. But I can't imagine what someone who just went through the story and moved on to the next game would be experiencing. Before I talk about the differences and tweaks of Infection to Mutation, I think it's important to actually correct myself on a mistake I made in the last video. Credit goes to Chloe and Steez for pointing this out and explaining it further. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. So I said in the last video that the dungeons were actually set and pre-created, but they actually are randomized, just not in the way that I thought they were. The dungeons use random seeds to generate themselves. In programming, there's no real random numbers, so what they do is they get one really big number, or a pseudo-random number, and choose a point, or a seed, to start in it. The dot hack games use the keywords you choose when selecting a dungeon as a seed. So when you go through a dungeon and give those keywords to someone else, the random aspects of that dungeon will be in the same place because you're starting off in the same place of that really big number. If you need another example of this sort of generation, take a look at Minecraft, Terraria, or the Chalice dungeons in Bloodborne. So there you have it. If I got something wrong, please feel free to correct me in the comments section because I'm dumb and just talking about this is blowing my mind. So right off the bat, Mutation introduces stronger potions and spells that do more damage and heal twice as much as the previous games. The problem of items being more useful than healing spells is still there, but at the very start, even items feel useless because of how much damage enemies do every second. The stronger healing spells still take a while to cast, and you can still use multiple healing items in the time it takes for you to cast one spell. But I felt less frustrated with that whole fact because I could actually trust the AI to take up healing duty this time around. It's hard to tell if it was just bad luck in Infection, but when I told my party members to behave in specific ways, they only sort of did what I told them to do. Like if I told my whole party to use skills, sure they would use a skill once, but then they would go on for a while without using anything, and the moment I set them to use a skill again is the only time they actually do it. That was also the case for healing. In Mutation, it felt like your computer allies actually had brains during the dungeons this time. They used skills and attacks that the enemies were actually weak to, they used them as often as they could, and when I set someone to heal, they actually stayed back and healed me when I needed it, and stayed on the ball so I didn't have to worry about that. Mistral actually predicted damage a few times, and started a spell up before the damage could actually hit once or twice too. They still get the occasional hiccups though, which could get pretty frustrating when you're surrounded by 3 enemies that all fight from a distance. Mia and Elk, what the fuck are you doing? I'm paralyzed, you're stuck on a goddamn fence, do something! They also gave allies a few different responses when you gift them stuff. Before, they sort of had the same response no matter what I gave them, and it always brought up their affection by the same amount, unless it was a super rare endgame weapon. In Mutation, they respond differently depending on how good that item is for them, and some of them have some genuinely nice responses.
Thank you. I'm so happy. I don't usually get presents from people.
Okay, I connect with Elk on a personal level, so I might be okay with him now. The next person we hang out with is Gardenia again. She invites us to a place to kill off a monster that beat her before, and then she just leaves. She's still pretty reserved and antisocial, though Kite keeps trying to strike up a conversation.
Do you like flowers, Gardenia?
Why do you say that?
You picked the fields with flower names, and you talked about flowers the last time we met.
Must I explain?
Only if you'd like.
Well, then don't bother asking.
Damn, Gardenia, I was just trying to talk to you. You don't have to be a dick about it. God damn. Next, we got this guy called Nuke Usagimaru. And yes, I have to say his whole name every single time. He hosts a sort of big entertainment event at a dungeon, and we have to come alone. His initial performance is so bad that we're the only ones left in the whole dungeon, and we have to go through it all to the bottom floor completely alone. I don't really know what's up with this first performance.
Why is the grass green? Why is the sky blue? And why is water wet? Sorry to keep you waiting.
Like, was that a warm-up? Was it a hype thing? And when we get to the bottom floor, he starts this battle talk show thing. Just make a podcast or something, dude. God. He gives us his member address, and for the rest of the game, he kinda uses us as a sort of straight man for his dumb guy act in emails. After all those side dungeons, we resume the plot and go through a dungeon with Mia and Elk. Mia's acting a little odd though. Her connection seems to be super off. You know, if your voice is screwing up that bad because of your connection, it probably shows in your game too. I've seen people lag out, it gets pretty bad. So we go through the dungeon in hopes of finding some clues about the weird things going on in the game, while Mia and Elk tag along to find aromatic grass. What is aromatic grass? I have no idea. It's just grass. It's just grass. It doesn't do anything at all. They say it multiple times. God, you two are weirdos. Regardless of why they want the grass or how they even locate places that have it, we get a virus core from a bugged enemy, and also find a bit of grass. That seems to fix Mia somehow, until it doesn't. And that's pretty much all the important stuff they have to do in the game. Great talk, guys. So after that, there's another optional dungeon that involves a new twin blade called Moonstone. He actually appears in the previous 3 dungeons, but disappears without a word. After you see him 3 times, he gives you his member address and requests that you come with him to a dungeon where he wants to
annihilate all monsters in the dungeon.
Well, that's kind of it with him. Just a dude that really likes to train. Really likes to train. We get another lead for a different protected area. We break into that area and... Hey Pyros, do you mind turning down the personal theme music you have in the game? It's kind of bringing the mood here, man. We're supposed to be in this foreboding and ominous area where we don't know what could be waiting for us in the dungeon, and you just come in with a goddamn marching band. Anyways, we do get to the final floor of the dungeon where we find someone getting attacked. There's something really wrong with this player though. They're acting very strange. Then he just sort of leaves. Why do people keep doing that? I mean, a bye would be nice. Leos kinda sorta explains that what we saw was failed data that got through the security measures. And because he's Leos, he doesn't explain any more than that. He just goes on with his usual, "No, you do what I say," whine and gives us some new keywords to go to with Black Rose, who at this point is starting to question Leos and if we're really doing the right thing by doing what he says. It feels like it hasn't even been a day yet and you already have your workers questioning you, Leos. Are you really qualified for this job? You're a really bad admin. At this point, I also realized something about our progression and what we were doing so far in terms of both story and side dungeons. In Infection, we constantly hop between Theta and Delta server, but now, and for the rest of the game, we sort of stick with Lambda server and never go back. Sure, we can still go to the other servers, and I've done that for grinding and farming, but nothing ever actually tells you to go back. Somehow this makes Mutation feel smaller, or shorter, despite the fact that I actually clocked in more time in Mutation than I did Infection. Just thought it would be interesting to mention. Getting into the next story area, we run into something a little more dangerous and a little weirder than a data bug. This odd stone texture thing phases in, almost taunting the duo as it leads them deeper into the dungeon. When we get into the last room, we're transported into the same battlefield we fought Skaith in, and we immediately begin the battle with Innis, the Mirage of Deceit. No, we're not playing the intro. As cool as it is, this guy's way too easy to deserve any bit of respect. Seriously, I was super intimidated when I got into the dungeon and saw that I was going to fight something like Skaith at the end. And while I was getting to the bottom floor, I was actually getting filled with a sort of sense of dread. I didn't think I was ready at all, especially with how hard the first few dungeons of the game were. And then I fought him. And I saw how low his damage was. And how I could put little to no thought into it and even walk up to him and beat him up myself. I don't know if I should feel relieved or disappointed. I'm very conflicted right now. We deal with Innis the same way we dealt with Skaith, only this time we get some sort of segment from him. Things start looking shaky when Innis falls, and when we get back, we find out that the system had been shut down because things outside of the area were starting to get critical. Whatever that means. Leos winds us out again, saying, "Meh, stop doing things, meh, I'm the one in charge." And Black Rose decides that she's had enough of his shit and moves on without him. At the same time, we get contacted by Aura again, getting another area code from her directly. Her message is scrambled like before, but we're able to definitely make out one word in all of it. Cubia. Did you feel that chill run down your spine? Yeah, it's well deserved. We'll get to that in a second. Before we jump into that area, Mistral pops up back into the plot. She asks us to take her along to the new dungeon, once again thinking it's an event instead of a life-threatening problem. Something else odd happens to the players in the town before we head into the dungeon. They all have voices now, familiar ones too.
I am against service overtime!
But no, the real thing is that everyone's acting all weird. They're saying unrelated and nonsensical things and just standing around. Heading into the dungeon, it starts off as a normal infected area that Mistral treats as any other dungeon. Kite finally spills the beans and tells Mistral about everything that happened up to this point, and Mistral just sort of takes it as a really detailed backstory for a roleplay character. Come on Mistral, who do you think we are? Pyros? We're better than that. At the end of the dungeon, we see the segment we got from Innis glow and resonate with Kite's bracelet. Mistral sort of very casually says she believes Kite after seeing that. A little weird. You'd think the proper reaction would be something more like, "Oh my god, that was real? I almost fell into a fucking coma. Jesus Christ, I'm out of here." But Mistral seems to be more concerned about Aura and how dead she looks. Our gawking is interrupted when Cubia begins its attack, and holy shit is in an attack. You don't fight Cubia itself in the boss fight, rather the core. This core has a stupid amount of HP, and the most annoying part of it, it switches invulnerabilities. So for a few seconds it would be immune to physical damage, but in the next second it would be immune to all magical damage. I think that's why they made Mistral a mandatory party member for this fight, so you would have at least one magic user in your party to help deal damage. On top of this all, Cubia also bombards you with insane party-wide damage every time it switches to a different invulnerability. And for a final cherry on top of this giant middle finger of a boss fight, Cubia summons additional enemies to swarm you while you're trying to attack the core. These guys can either attack you for lots of damage, hit you with a status ailment, or heal the core. This fight took up to 40 minutes to finish for me, and this wasn't even the final boss. We don't even kill Cubia at the end, it just pisses off. Yeah, you better run, you damn creepy, mist-drooling son of a purple, stupid skull dumb thing. Helba pops up to give us a general goal to work towards. Release Aura. What does that mean? I don't know, she leaves without telling us anything after that. Mistral apologizes for not believing us from the very start, and says that she'll do all she can to help. And then she leaves to do some shopping. Pretty casual about all this, aren't you, Mistral? Taking a break from the plot, We see on the message board that someone is calling out Kite by name and challenging him to come alone to a dungeon. We get there and find Akuamon. Wait, sorry, Marlo the Blade Master. He comes off as a jerk, but the way he talks and his whole character is just really cool to me. Especially when he tells off these lame goody guys here. When we meet him at the bottom of the dungeon, he's surprised by the fact that we actually came, saying he forgot what he wanted to talk about. He then gives us his member address and then leaves. Man, he's so cool. We also hear from Natsume at this point too. She says that the next time we see her, she'll be 10 times stronger than the last time we saw her. She's referring to a weird rumor on the message board, talking about an enemy that would multiply your level by 10 when you defeat them. Obviously that's not true, but what the hell is up with this post? There's people replying to the thread as if it's true. So either some guy made multiple accounts to convince people, or a group of friends really wanted to prank someone despite not ever seeing their reaction. Also, the real enemy at the end of the dungeon was a cakewalk. I genuinely don't know what's up with this rumor. We also get a little side dungeon with Sanjuro, but he has like 0 things to say the entire time. He does give us some really good weapons, but that's it. I guess they can't always be winners. Getting back into the plot, Piro sticks his bulkhead in again to tell us that he found the location of his prankster, aka Mia. He plans to corner her at the bottom of the dungeon with Kite's help and give her a stern talking to, I guess? I don't know. Player killing was disabled in the world after Sign, so we can't really do anything but yell very angrily at her. It all ends with him getting pranked anyways, and we all have a nice laugh. Yeah, this is funny and all, but hey Mia, why are you talking normally again?
Good question. I don't know.
Alright, fair enough. Okay, getting back into the actual plot of the game. We start seeing on the board on how there was yet another noise incident, and more people are starting to fall into comas. People are starting to believe these rumors, and the sirens blaring outside after the incident tells us that the real world is starting to get heavily affected by this too. We also start hearing about the Epitaph of Twilight. At least a small summary of the story. The entire epitaph is an epic poem written by Emma Wayland, a deceased author. We see more of the epitaph at the very start of Infection, though what it exactly means is still a mystery. The very base of what we know right now is that the story involves a group of people seeking out a being called the Twilight Dragon, which has the power to save the world from being destroyed by something called the Abominable Wave. For some reason, the epitaph seems to have close ties to the world. Rumors are told that the original game before the world, called Fragment, was based on the Epitaph of Twilight. The fact that the system admin of the whole game is named after an entire character tells us that this rumor may not be far off. Serious roleplayers of the game even offer blessings of a being called the Twilight Dragon. So there's at least some ties between the world and the Epitaph, but there's a lot about both that are shrouded in mystery. Why exactly the game has so many references to the Epitaph isn't clear, and the poem itself was lost some time after Emma's death. Only bits and pieces remain, and Black Rose sets off to find more info about it. While she does this, we get another side dungeon that's kinda really cool actually. Someone calls out on the message board to a certain young lady who replies by calling them an old man. They both agree to meet together in the area that the young lady first met a certain person. Rejected Oblivious Wave Master. This is where Mimiru first ran into Tsukasa back in Dot Hack Sign, as well as where the whole anime started in general. The people talking on the board are Bear and Mimiru, planning to meet up. Is it just me or is the name of the area a little too appropriate? Like, eerily so. We start off the dungeon, and at the very first room we run into a character called A20. She's also from Sign, but her inclusion is a little weird and uncalled for. All she talks about is a rare item, and then she leaves because the monsters are too strong for her. Which is a callback to what happened to her in the anime, but it had no actual significance to what was happening at all in the game. She just says that and leaves, and no one ever mentions her. Even Mimiru doesn't say anything about her. Mimiru herself is cool though. She greets us exactly how she greets Tsukasa, before having to leave because Bear changed the location. I guess she was feeling generous because she decides to give us her sword for some reason, which by the way is called Mimiru's Sword and is a rare item in an MMO. Who in CC Corp decided to add this item in the game? Why exactly? Like, this is still an MMO, but Mimiru straight up just had a special sword dedicated to her. We get an email from Linda? Wow. I wasn't expecting a random side character to email us again. Usually it's someone with a portrait that tells us where to go next. Glad to know you didn't just disappear, I guess. She tells us that Balmung is heading towards another weird room, like the white one we saw from the last game. It's in this dungeon where I found out that confusion is the worst status effect ever. We also find a passage from the Epitaph, but it's the most vague thing in the world. Something about a moon, and a finger, and some dumb guy? I don't know, man. Oh, and Balmung's here to just sort of say, no, don't talk to me, you're dumb, bye. Man, we sure are being productive and uncovering a lot like this, aren't we guys? We hear back from Black Rose, who gets a lead on someone who might be able to tell us more about the Epitaph of Twilight. Wiseman. He's a guy that seems to be in the business of trading items and information for more items and information. For some reason, he chooses the bottom of a dungeon for his base of operation. I don't know, maybe he needs to see if people are worthy of seeing him, I guess? He tells us to go to an area and get a weapon for him, and then he'll give us the information we need. This weapon, however, is in a protected area which he chose on purpose to test us. Does he just do this? Like, to everyone? Why do you have to make this more difficult than it already is? Speaking of making things more difficult than it needs to be, we also spot Leos giving Balmung a task, though we don't see exactly what they're talking about. After going through all of Wise Man's dungeon a second time, I don't know why we couldn't just skip to the bottom, we tell him of everything that's happened up to this point. Do you think we told him about Pyros too? I mean, he was part of the plot, even if he was stupid. He agrees to email us about the Epitaph and even becomes a proper party member, one that will be very important to the rest of the quadrilogy. I mean, more important than Pyros at least. When we get back to the login screen, we see, oh my god! Yep, this is definitely the end of the game here. Kinda surprising, really. I mean, the game overall was equal to, or even a bit longer than the first game, but it felt like a lot less happened. It really felt like the game was about 2/3 dungeons and side stuff and 1/3 actual important plot. And to be fair, the side stuff was really fun, but the lack of progression in the main story leaves me a little wanting. Amidst a sea of endgame emails, we get one from Wiseman that contains a whole passage from the Epitaph of Twilight. It describes the cursed wave, which is the same one previously mentioned that would bring about death, chaos, and destruction. The passage explains the multiple phases in the wave, as well as the person in charge of each phase. At the start is Skaith, the terror of death that drowns all that stand. Aiding the wave is Innis, who betrays all with a false image. 6 more phases are foretold after those two, and each one sounds more troubling than the last. I'll describe them as they come because, I mean, what, do you think we aren't going to fight them all? Do you think we're just gonna stop at Innis? Get out of here. Wiseman finishes the email by suggesting we try to find Helba, and then gives us a sort of spell to reach her in a place called Net Slum, even though what it clearly is the answer to a puzzle. I mean, come on, look at it. We get a lead to another area with a weird person at the bottom and
Lambda, scattering fossils milestone. Lambda, scattering fossils milestone.
alright, calm down, we're going, god. I'll be honest, this whole dungeon feels really pointless and just there to fill time. All we get is another set of keywords to an area that we actually have to go to, and then we see Leos destroy one of those weird lingering data things. We could have just skipped this whole point and gotten the keywords to the actual final dungeon through Wiseman, and then we would have saved half an hour of dungeon-ing. When we get back to town, Balmung gives us a virus core to access the area for Net Slum, and he totally, absolutely does not intend to trap us or trick us. Nope, not at all. Ignore everything we saw of him talking to Leos because this is a genuine, real change of heart. When we get to the bottom of the dungeon, we're transported to Net Slum, which is very uncomfortable.
Are you really awake right now? Don't bother pinching yourselves. Our dreams are very realistic.
Why do you all sound like the kids from Digimon? This makes me really upset. We find one resident that can actually speak in clear and coherent sentences. And he explains to us that the Epitaph of Twilight is split throughout the world in incoherent and confusing bits. We've already collected a few of those bits from those white rooms, but there's a lot more to find. He also starts explaining exactly what Net Slum is to us. Net Slum is a place where stray and failed data drifts off to, sort of like a safe haven for them, since the system administrator can't spot it unless led to the slum directly. This place was brought up in Sign as well, and also used when Tsukasa and friends needed to find an escape from Orphana. It's one of the more important spots in the entire Dot Hack franchise. I would even say it's more important than the cathedral Kite first got his bracelet at. These failed instances of data are NPCs and AI created for the world but were lost or had no purpose to begin with. Some people even made their own just because they found them funny to look at. And, well, I mean, they're not wrong.
I don't know. Really don't know.
Sometimes these AIs even come from players that lost their bodies in the real world, living on as a weird remnant of what they were through bits and pieces of memory. He also describes this as the fate of a man named Harold. We've seen some notes from a man named Harold already, who cared deeply for someone and also wanted to assure the safety and growth of Aura. Helba comes in with another note from him, describing how he needs to speak with someone named Morgana. In order to speak with her though, Harold must do something that involves leaving the living flesh, implying that whatever he did, he became a remnant AI because of it. At the end of the note, he finally names the target of his affection, Emma, the same woman that wrote the Epitaph of Twilight. Helba explains who this Harold person is. Harold Horwick, the creator of the world. While we don't know his exact relationship with Emma and the exact details of the creation of the world just yet, we can at least deduce a few things. 1. He deeply cared about Emma, enough to base the entire game he created on her unfinished poem. He was also so distraught over her death that he created Aura, an AI that would act as a daughter that he and Emma would never have. 2. He is the man that we see in both the Strange Room in Sign and Emma's grave in Liminality. It could be assumed that he somehow gave up his body and put his consciousness into the game, in the form of a broken AI whose actions are very confusing. 3. He did that all to speak with a being called Morgana regarding something about Aura. Before we can learn anything more, Balmung jumps into the fray and whoa. You can fly? I thought those wings were purely aesthetic, but you're telling me they could actually do something? Apparently that was a reward for becoming a descendant of Fianna. How fair is that though? No wonder you're still the best player in the game, you were given the ability to fly. Balmung's abilities aside, Helba drops the bomb that this was a trick and Balmung was just using us. Oh no, how could this be? I thought we were best friends based off all the times you told me to fuck off. Before we could bitch out Balmung for using us, Leos comes in with his own gambit, explaining that he used Balmung to lead him to Net Slum, where he planned to destroy every single one of us. Except we already established that you can't delete Kite, Helba's a legendary hacker that could probably get away, and Stray AI still needs to go somewhere, so either another place like Net Slum would be made, or you would basically just be letting loose an entire freak show on the whole normal game world. So really the only people you would be hurting are Black Rose and Balmung, and that would solve absolutely nothing. I mean, it might piss off Black Rose, but you really don't want to do that. Of course Leos doesn't go through with it anyway. He gets interrupted by a giant shake in the game as the world starts to become unstable and critical again. Helba says that this is her doing, as in the world itself. Apparently the world doesn't really like us at all, and sends us another phase to fight, Magus the Propagator. In the Epitaph of Twilight, his role in the wave was to send a drop of the wave to the heavens, creating a new wave. Magus initially isn't that hard, especially if you have fast area attacks, but he surprisingly gets harder after you data drain him. Beforehand, he had an attack that would do heavy damage to the party depending on how many leaves you allow on the field, but when you data drain him, he stops dropping leaves entirely. Instead, for the rest of the fight, he just points at someone and they die. Seriously, he could just select a person to cast a spell on and it's impossible to outdo that damage. Even Mistral, who should have a high magic defense, doesn't stand a chance against that damage. If he ever catches your whole party in a clump, you're pretty much boned. We still get him down despite how much of a dick he is. And with his defeat, Net Slum starts to crumble and fall too. We escape to Lambda server, but things aren't really right at all with the world.
What the hell happened? You're kidding me, right?
Things aren't looking so great in the real world either. The second Liminality disc shows us that things are starting to crash down hard as all electronics start failing in specific areas. We see the whole effects of these crashes through the point of view of Yuki Aihara, a frequent player of the world and friend of Sieg. She spends the OVA trapped in a building with the threat of toxic gases leaking through. She escapes onto the street to see that the world outside isn't faring much better, looking almost like a second Pluto's kiss. Luckily, the power comes back, though the destruction that came from the crash was very extreme. Maya also finds information on Harold Horwick, and Takaoka meets up with Yuki after the power outage, as all three of them make plans to find out just how the world connects with the coma patients as well as the power outages. And that's where Mutation's story ends. Remember when I said it felt like maybe a third of the game was actual plot? Well, most of that third felt like it came from the very end. For the rest of the game, it felt like we were just running in circles while people whined at us to stop doing things. Also, occasionally Cubia harassed us. We still have a lot of side stuff to do though. And yes, the world stays messed up during the whole post-game. No one seems to mind at all though. Not even a peep from the forums or the news. People are too busy talking about apples, I guess. So we got 4 side things to do, 3 not being so bad and the 4th being, I guess I'll get the worst one out of the way first. You could do this one at any time in the game actually, but I saved it for the end because I like to hold off my suffering as much as possible. So in Theta and Lambda server, you can raise these little pig things called grunties. You feed them stuff to make them grow from a tiny baby to a full-grown adult. And based off what you fed to the little guy, it'll turn into a different type of grunty. Each server that has grunty raising available has a different set of grunties that you can make. And while it was a little annoying having to grind for rarer foods, it wasn't so bad, and I kinda grew a liking to these big dumb weirdos.
Oh, Master, thank you so much. Thanks to you, I'm fully grown. Clang! I must repay my debt to you. Clang!
So why was I dreading this part so much? The fucking flag racing. So when you get a full-grown grunty, you get the option to ride it on the field. It plays a silly song, and you can ignore portals for as long as you're on the grunty. Pretty useful for when you're just looking for items and stuff. If you raise all 3 types of grunties in an area, you unlock the flag races, which are little timed checkpoint races that give you really amazing rewards like health and SP boosts. And by useful, I mean insanely powerful. By the time I was done, I had almost as much health as Pyros. You know, the guy whose entire class is about being beefy. And I had way more SP than Mistral, who was a freaking wizard. I was a damage dealing class with more health than a tank and more resources for magic than a dedicated magic user. That's stupid, and I love it. What I don't love is the freaking races themselves. Alright, let's start with the controls of the races. If you want to get the top ranking prizes, there's a set type of grunty you need to play. It's impossible to get very high times with the other two grunties. The best grunties though have slippery controls. If you want to even hope to get that first place, which is a very tight time, you're going to have to endure some terrible ice physics. Next up is the courses themselves. The course in Lambda server is alright I guess, but that's because it's so wide, but the one in Theta server is awful. There's all these thin paths with little snags that you can get caught in, and these freaking NPCs! When you start the race, the town doesn't get cleared of any NPCs, so you have to actually avoid them or you're going to lose a lot of speed. This adds a little bit of a luck factor to the race because you can't control when some asshole decides he wants to walk on the bridge and block your path, or even walk on the freaking flag! Why the hell is this even a thing? They specifically say this is part of the challenge, but how many people are playing the world again? Like 20 million? How much hell is that when multiple people want to race? Honestly, I'm amazed that the servers aren't as crowded as they should be with 20 million players running around. No wonder Balmung is at the top. He probably picked up his grunty and flew to the flag points. Cheating bastard. Oh, and hey, let's talk about the worst of it all. The times. Right off the bat, I'll just say that these times are freaking brutal. The difference between second and first place is 80 milliseconds. Not only that, but you want to get second place before first because it gives you the SP increasing item. So you can get up to 3 of each prize for every place. But here comes the other problem. Your recent time is recorded as the newest place. Do you know what that means? It means that the window for getting second and even first place gets smaller and smaller until you can't get it anymore. Eventually there has to be a limit, right? Like eventually you have to get a flawless time. So basically, if you want to get all the items, you have to play well, but not too well. Let me remind you that the window for first and second place is 80 milliseconds. Now, imagine trying to just get under 20 seconds and 80 milliseconds, and then doing it again and hoping you don't get first place or get close to first place. This is not at all what you should be doing for a timed race. I should want to improve my score, not stagnate. That's just stupid. Why not just, I don't know, make first, second, and third static times and give rewards for those, but have like a super great and big one-time only reward for getting the world record. Oh wait, you already do have a special one-time reward for first place. Hey, let's check out the leaderboards and see who the top rankings are. Oh look, first place is Kite, second place is Kite, and third place is Kite. How does that make any sense? Alright, I think I got that off my chest now. Let's just relax, calm down, and get to the other optional things like, oh my god, actually it's not that bad. It was pretty easy after I realized I could remove her magic immunity and then bombard her with a bunch of spells. Pretty cathartic too after Oh, and I found out what having all the goblin gear does after you beat the last goblin. It's a summoning spell to bring up a bunch of goblins to attack, and it's absolutely worthless. The third optional thing is another thing we could have done through the game normally, but I saved this one for the end because it's just easier to group them all together. If we go to the cathedral with the aura statue, we could see a few cutscenes from .hack's sign but with in-game models. Not that the models look that great, honestly I'd prefer just watching the anime and these scenes don't really explain or do much. But hey, I got status increasing things for free so I don't mind. And finally we have the big post-game activity, the post-game dungeon. This one is actually pretty easy, which was both relaxing and a little bit disappointing. I know I complained about Infection's post-game boss being too much, but this guy was kind of pathetic. I still want a challenge, I don't want this doormat. Well, I mean he did cause a bit of a problem when Mistral just sort of walked up to him and invited him to punch her in the face. She didn't really do anything about it either, she just sort of took it and died. Thanks Mistral, you're a great help. So I've said this a few times in this video, but I feel like I need to say it again to give some sort of conclusion for the people who weren't paying attention. There isn't much that goes on in the game when it comes to actual serious story plot stuff. A lot of the party members we get are side characters instead of story point characters, and the plot points are sort of repeated a few times. Balmung is a whiny dick, Leos is a whiny dick, and Kite fixes things and gets confused. It's only at the end where we get any sort of information, and while it was nice, where was that for the rest of the game? It was nice seeing some stuff about Black Rose at the very start, but there was over 15 hours of stuff between that and the end, and that was filled with mostly long and painful side dungeons and side characters. Fun and interesting side characters, but side characters all the same. When it comes to the game itself, I would say they definitely made improvements where it counted. I wasn't expecting any huge changes of course. The games only had a 3-month period between each other, but the tweaks that they did make really helped. Specifically, the AI being smarter and more helpful made it more enjoyable to play how I wanted to, letting someone else pull healer duty while I satisfied my caveman instincts and hit things hard and frequently. But the addition of more party involvement and an expanded way to get affection really helped too, both to get more out of the character and to make the grind for raising affection faster. And hey, even though I disliked the pacing of the story, I still had a great time seeing the good plot stuff at the end. I still really love the plot after all. And the hint of the crazy web we're about to see just makes me more excited to jump into Outbreak. The point we're stopping at is a pretty big one, and Kite even begins to see this as a turning point for him and his reaction to the world and everything in it.
Maybe this was a turning point. The relationship between me and the game, the world, has gone beyond pure amusement. And it was spreading beyond the network.